pjnet.tv. It is 9 p.m. on the East Coast of the United States, and we are about to shed some light on some darkness. We are going to open the door and look into the darkness and shine some light. And to help us do that, we have our first-time guest, Kristin Clouse, standing by in our green room. She will be first-time guest number 280, I think, or 81. Either way, a lot of them. Running the bumper, we are streaming, we're recording. Let's count it down to Studio 40 Alpha, starting now. Welcome. This is pjnet.tv. I'm your host, Coach Prasick. You are about to see a new world. We are going to take a peek into subject matters that are in many ways off limits, or seemingly off limits. They really aren't. They really shouldn't be, but yet so often we find that they are. And to help us on this journey, we have a first-time guest, and that would be Kristin Clouse, who is a licensed, what's the official title, Kristin?
Licensed professional clinical counselor.
Okay, clinical counselor. Okay, yeah. Not just peer counseling.
Well, it's different in every state. Sometimes it's licensed professional counselor. Sometimes it's licensed professional clinical counselor. So LPCC.
Yeah, but this is a serious discipline. This is not you're between jobs and you're going to call yourself a life coach.
No. I had to go and get a master's, take a test, and do a few things to get my license. Yeah.
Okay. Folks, we have but 20 minutes to cover. I'm going to tell you, we can only scratch the surface, but I think what you're about to hear is going to be life-changing, if not for yourself, but for somebody you probably know, because Kristin, there's this notion out there that, we accept Christ and our world just, everything becomes okay. And if it's not okay, you just don't have enough Jesus. But that's not really the case, is it?
No, actually, it's not the case. That wasn't the case for me. And that's not the case for many people that I work with, hundreds of people, thousands of people that I've worked with over the years.
Kristin, we're going to talk a little bit about your podcast, but I had a chance to listen to a few episodes, and I was amazed when I heard that your freshman year in high school, you were on a valedictorian trajectory.
Yeah, I was.
A year later, you only passed 2 classes.
Yeah. Yeah, that year was, it was a rough year. It was actually, I refer to it as my worst nightmare. That year I went out with some friends. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I was raised by a single mom. My parents were divorced when I was a baby, and that was back when that wasn't as common. Oh. And I went out with some friends, and that night turned into my worst nightmare, where I was held against my will, assaulted throughout the night, and I was able to escape the next morning. And I told my mom, she was at work, and I told her we filed charges, we contacted the police, and you would think that the nightmare would stop there, but it didn't. The nightmare continued. My name became public. I was 14 years old. I'm kind of dating myself here a little bit. I'm in my 50s, so this was a little while ago. And but my name even back then wasn't supposed to be released, and it was. And I was stalked by this person that assaulted me. I was called names. There were things said about me at school. It became very split, our community, and that propelled me into a life. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the support system. And so I went heavy into drugs and alcohol. And so that entire year, the only reason actually I stayed in high school was because of my school counselor, Mr. Burkett. He would not let me drop out. He was very adamant that I stay in because he knew what kind of a student I had been beforehand. So that just, my life was changed because of that. And by the time I was 21, I was heavily addicted to drugs, and I was a broken mess. And I was an absolute mess, and suicidal, depressed, anxious, had stomach issues, just had a lot of things that were spiraling out of control. So I reached out to a friend who had gotten saved, had started going to church 2 years before, and I had avoided her, and I called her. And I knew if I called her, she was going to say, "Will you go to church with me?" And so I knew my answer ahead was going to be yes, because I was so broken. I was such a mess. And so I went to church with her, and it was a different kind of church than our traditional churches. It was a house church. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California. It's a beach town, and it was on the west side of Santa Cruz. And the pastor and the leaders in the church were all surfers, so our service depended on the waves and the sets that were coming in. And I got saved in that little house church with about 30 people as a part of that church. And but you're right, my story, I didn't wake up the next day and everything was okay. In fact, 2 weeks after that, I was about to commit suicide, and my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, intervened, and it was a long journey, but I prayed, and I was committed, and we rearranged our life. We moved, we did different things so that we could be healthy, so I could be healthy. And then I got plugged into a great church, went to some not so good counselors at first, but found a really good counselor, and started probably about a 10-year journey of healing and restoration of my life.
Okay, you're north of 20 at this point that you're sharing. What does your career path look like at this point?
At that point, I always say the first half of my adult life, after I got saved, I actually did theater and dance. And because I grew up taking dance, that was my one thing that was my place of safety. I actually had sexual abuse that happened when I was in 5th and 6th grade as well. And so somehow when I was 14, I think because of what happened when I was younger, that was why I had the courage to say something. And by the way, I was told I was ruining his life. Nobody ever asked if my life was ruined. And he only got probation and registered as a sex offender, but the lowest sex offender at that time. And so I did theater and dance, and we had a dance school at our church, and God really used the arts to really restore my heart and restore my life. But working with the young people I worked with, there were a lot of broken kids. There were a lot of people struggling, a lot of teenagers, adults, and children, and I felt like I didn't have the tools to help them, and I wanted the tools. I didn't want to just refer them to somebody. So that sent me back to school. I had had my AA at that time. I got my bachelor's and then got my master's and became a licensed counselor. And then somewhere in the mix, I took classes, Bible classes, and became a pastor as well. And so my heart and passion is to see people healed and restored. And I know that if God can heal me, then he can heal anybody. If God can restore me, then he can restore anybody, because we're all the same. I'm not any better. We're all equal in God's eyes. And so my heart and passion is to see individuals find out who God created them to be and remove all the barriers in their life from past trauma, past issues, so that they can be fully restored for Jesus.
Yeah, Kristin, coming from such a traumatic childhood and growing up period and well into your formative years, to turn that around to where you're counseling others who have had similar circumstances, that is a providential experience. But there's a discernment that I always have in my mind, and I always bring it up when we're on the air. I'm not picking on you, but I want you to describe and tell us, are you a counselor who is also a Christian, or are you a Christian counselor?
I've worked both in the secular world and as a counselor and in private practice as a counselor. One of the things as a counselor, we are actually in our ethics and the things that we signed. I am a Christian counselor, but if somebody does not want Christian counseling, I believe that God gives me opportunities to speak life to them, to minister to them, and they don't realize that it's the Jesus in me. Sometimes they do. They know I'm a Christian. They see things in my office. They see things, I'll say things occasionally. God will open that door for me to ask about their faith, to ask about their relationship with God. So I really feel like my role, I don't feel like it's so cut and dry. I don't feel like on one side you're a Christian who's a counselor or a Christian counselor, although I know of individuals who are Christians who are counselors that really don't bring their faith into the counseling at all. But I do advertise as a Christian counselor. I have churches that refer people to me. And really, the truth is, to get the full healing and restoration in your life, we need Jesus. That's the part that needs to be brought in.
Amen. We're going to run out of time. I hate this. You have gone another step, and this has been relatively recently. But you started a podcast. And folks, I encourage you, I'm going to put the website up on the screen. I want you to go take a listen. Go to her website. You can get there to the podcast from there, KristinClouse.com. And I listened to maybe 3 or 4 episodes, but I was intrigued by your introduction where you, it's a disclaimer of sorts. You say that some of the subject material is not really good for children. It's not rated R, but it's not really PG either. It's pretty transparent. It's pretty raw. Should teenagers, since so many teenagers were affected, yourself included, should teenagers listen to this?
I think it really depends on the teenager, and not every show is that way. So that disclaimer is usually only on a show, an episode that I know that we're going to discuss about some type of trauma or abuse, and there's going to be a little bit of detail, or if there's something about mental health, suicide attempts, things like that. So I like to be sure on that end that parents have that ability to screen that and not just having it playing in their car with their children in the back. As far as teenagers, I think that for teenagers that are looking to be fully restored, that have experienced some life difficulties, I don't think anything we say is going to be shocking to them. Because they're looking to be fully restored. And really the episodes, again, we talk about a variety of things. We could talk about relationships with mother and daughter, and that doesn't have the same disclaimer on it. Really, the whole purpose of the show is to talk about the things that we in the church are often uncomfortable talking about.
Okay. Folks, disclaimer of my own, we have been having technical problems in terms of the connection, and I believe that Kristin is locked up, frozen up right now. So Kristin, if you're able, she's working on it, okay? And it comes right back. We had this happen numerous times when we were doing the kind of the dry run thingy. There, see, she's back. I told you you'd be back. Kristin, talk about triggers. You mentioned it in some of your podcasts.
Yeah, triggers are associated with trauma. Triggers are really what happens is our triggers are stored in our senses. Or memory, is stored in our senses. So often a memory isn't just associated with a picture image, but it could be a smell, it could be some food, it could be a sound, it could be somebody, an individual who has long dark hair could trigger a memory. So
settings
the triggers,
and circumstances.
yeah. Yeah, so they trigger that memory, that trauma memory of what has happened. Now we have things that can trigger that aren't associated to trauma. In fact, that word trigger is used a lot. Some people are very adamant that triggers are only associated with traumas, and then others say, I have a trigger for anger or anxiety or depression. But predominantly, triggers are based on a memory that we are not wanting to have in that moment. And so then I usually work with individuals on grounding skills to help them, because the memory hijacks us, is what I say. It's like somebody comes in and hijacks and takes over driving our car, and so we need to get back into the here and now. But it is very real for individuals from all types of trauma, whether it's a car accident, whether you've been in a natural disaster, whether you've experienced abuse, whether you are somebody that it was in combat or in a war zone. There's a lot of different scenarios that cause PTSD.
Well, that's not a surprising answer, and I've heard. I think it's well put. So often it's only associated with certain things like anger or PTSD. But so often I've heard in parenting, build good memories. Can't we volitionally, as parents, build positive memories that can be triggered in a positive way later on?
Well, absolutely, but it wouldn't be a trigger. So a trigger, it would be a memory. So a trigger has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah.
And it usually, what happens when we're triggered is basically in our brain, we bypass and go straight to the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so in that scenario, but yes, the memory, the situations and the memories that we can build with our children are things that they can hold on to, and then they're going to reflect back and have positive memories. I don't have a lot of positive memories of my childhood, but somebody else in a completely different situation could share story after story after story of positive memories of their childhood.
We're running out of time. You gave an analogy of life being like a journey of drifting down a river.
Yeah, our life is, the individuals I work with, their life is like a raft going down a river. And sometimes that raft gets stuck in the bushes on the side. And so my job is actually not to fix people. My job is to help people get unstuck. There are things that happen in our life where we feel stuck, whether it's depression, whether it's anger, whether it's betrayal. I mean, the list can go on of things that happen in our lives that can cause hurt or disappointment. And so really our job as a counselor isn't to fix people. And that was an awakening for me, to realize my job was not to fix somebody, but just to help somebody get unstuck. And so that's what I do. I work with people. They're the expert of their life. They know all the details of their life. I only know a little bit of their life. And so I'm just there to help them get unstuck.
Oh, I wish we had more time. We've got to talk about your book. It is on display over there. Healing.
Yes.
You realize cameras turn things around, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay.
I can see the book. I just wondered. So I looked at the logo here. I said it must be that way. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Healing for Our Soul Gardens. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that is really our soul, which is our mind, will, and our emotion. It becomes damaged when we experience trauma, abuse, and extreme life difficulties. So we end up with these soul wounds. And so this book is analogy. I actually am an analogy girl. I have an analogy for pretty much everything. And so it's about vandals have come in and destroyed our soul. And that is the abuse that's happened. And God is the master gardener. And we need to have God come in and help us, as well as with the counseling, professional experience I have and personal experience. So I combine all of that into walking individuals through a journey of healing. And many people that have done this on their own, as well and in groups, have said, when they do it on their own, I feel like Kristin is right here with me. And that is the best compliment in the world, where they're feeling like, even as they're reading the book, that I'm right there with them and helping them on their healing journey.
Kristin, we've already run out of time, but I want to spend at least a minute talking about your podcast, because I really enjoyed the episodes. But you have sort of a bipolar podcast. You kind of change formats in the summer. Tell us about that.
Well, in the summer, and maybe part of that is just because I talk about such heavy topics during the year. And in the summer, people aren't going to want to really have the time to listen to some of the intense stuff. And really, that's our life. We can't be on high intense stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. We need to have things that are nurturing our soul. And so during the summer, I do summer devotions, and those are going to start in July. And so I do that for 2 months, and then the new season 3, starts back in September.
Kristin, I'm very impressed. I mean, your professional credentials and the podcast I've heard, but your podcast has had, 81 episodes and thousands of downloads. I mean, God has blessed you tremendously, and I just can't help but believe that He's only just begun to do His work through you. Kristin, you are a blessing. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for sharing so candidly, not only here, but on your podcast. For too long, these subjects have been pressed down. We don't talk about those things here. Yeah. Or you go to a self-righteous church, and we don't have those problems here. It's like, actually you do. But anyway, Kristin, what a privilege it's been. In the short time we've shared. Thank you for sharing. We'd love to have you back sometime. And folks,
absolutely.
All right, we'll do it. Folks, if you haven't been to KristinClouse.com, you're doing it wrong. Okay, go there. I'm not a big podcast consumer, but I must have listened to 4 episodes. They're very riveting. As she said, they're very intense. And yes, she does use a lot of analogies, but Jesus did as well. I think they call them parables. Okay. Her analogies are like a breath of fresh. That's an analogy. It's the power. Okay. Hey, as good as that was, we're not done. We'll have Casper from Colorado coming to give us Casper's take at the bottom of the hour. So I've got to get things ready for him, but I would like you to do something. It's up to you. But it's something that I exercise, and it has helped me tremendously, so I wanted to offer it to you. It's only 2 questions. Here they are. You only have to answer yourself. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done in the kingdom of Christ and for the kingdom of Christ? The second question is, how long ago was that? Together, those 2 questions form this challenge: to never be satisfied with either answer.